And I'm thrilled, just very excited to be with Dr. Biden, and I will introduce her in a moment, but I want to thank you, Dr. Biden, and the Biden campaign for organizing this event. So let's talk about the ACA. Well, let's also put it in perspective. Right now, I think we all know in many ways, America's is we're raw right now. We are in the middle of three crises. Obviously, the pandemic, this public health crisis that has killed over 121,000 people in just the last few months. It has resulted in an economic crisis of a proportion we have never seen, where over 48 million people in just, again, the last few months have lost their jobs, where 1 in 5 mothers in our country who has a child under the age of 12 is describing her children as being hungry. And of course, we are in the midst of acknowledging and coming to terms with the systemic racism that has plagued our country since the beginning. And we are collectively speaking the names of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Rayshard Brooks and so many others. And so all of that to say that this is a time in our country when we need real leadership. In the midst of all that is happening, we need to be able to look to a leader who gives us a sense of confidence because they see the American people. They understand the American people. They care about the American people. And they have as a genuine commitment and ability to not only lift up the condition, but the spirits of the American people. And that's Joe Biden. There's no question that is Joe Biden. And so looking at where we are now, then all of that in the context of the ACA, well, it's pretty clear the connection. The Affordable Care Act, as we know, was an issue that was not only about public health, but also an issue that's about economic justice. Because after all, it was about understanding that in America, until Joe Biden, together with President Obama, did the almost unimaginable feat of passing the Affordable Care Act and writing it into law, we knew that the reason that so many people, 30 million people before that, did not have access to healthcare is because they simply couldn't afford it. So it is an economic justice issue as well as a healthcare issue. And yet, on the weekend of Juneteenth, which should have been a time for celebrating liberation and inclusion, Donald Trump held a rally where he ordered that his administration should slow down testing, which of course showed no commitment to the importance of America's health care and public health. And just yesterday, the Trump administration and AG Barr, the president's apparent personal lawyer, filed briefs with the United States Supreme Court to dismantle the Affordable Care Act, which at this point would strip 23 million people, 23 million Americans of their health care, all of this in the midst of a public health crisis. And so obviously this administration is trying to take healthcare away from millions of Americans. That's it. It's actually not much more complex than that. This administration, Donald Trump's administration, is trying to take healthcare away from tens of millions of Americans. And so let's look at who's going to be impacted. Well, in the context of COVID-19, we know that communities of color have been disproportionately impacted. Over 23,000 Black lives have been lost because of COVID-19 as of today. African Americans are over 3.5 times more likely, and Latinos are nearly twice as likely to die from the virus. Across Indian country, we've seen the COVID cases that have disproportionately impacted those communities, and I'll speak specifically about the Navajo Nation, which alone has has over 7,000 cases. So people are dying, but Donald Trump is prioritizing his political prospects and playing games at a time when people desperately need their health care. And so let's talk about it in the context of personal stories. My mother was probably the most important person in my life in so many ways, including just the impact that she had on my life. But about 11 years ago, she passed away from cancer. And I remember, and I was a caregiver for her. And, I remember during the course of her care, A doctor came up to me once and said, has anyone talked to you about anticipatory grief? I said, I hadn't heard that phrase, but of course it made perfect sense when I heard it, which is when you are the family member of someone who is going through an acute illness, going through the healthcare system, there is so much that is going on that is about making sure that that person can eat, and hopefully cooking food that they have an appetite to eat and hold down. It means making sure that they have clothes that will not hurt them because their skin is so sensitive because of the drugs that they're taking. It means taking them back and forth without any notice when they need to go to the hospital because they need to go to the hospital. It is about grieving someone you've not yet lost. And all the while that the American people would have to do all of that and worry about how they're going to pay the bills is unconscionable and immoral. So I say all of that to say this is the most important election of our lifetime for so many reasons, but in the context of America's healthcare system, in the context of the Affordable Care Act, in the context of who we need as leadership to carry us through these crises to a better day, we have to elect Joe Biden president of the United States. We need him. We need his leadership. We need what he so uniquely has, which is empathy for the American people and an understanding of what suffering is like. And in that way, has a genuine drive to alleviate the suffering of his fellow person. So I want to thank everybody for being a part of this this call. And listen, Joe is going to protect the Affordable Care Act. He's going to expand it. He knows that healthcare is a right, not a privilege. And he is going to reopen enrollment and allow for the uninsured to actually have access to healthcare during this pandemic. He believes that no matter who you are, that COVID-19 testing and treatment and any vaccine when we have it should be free of charge. And he believes in lowering prescription drug costs, all of which are going to bring huge relief to so many American families. So let's do everything we can. Let's do everything we must do to elect Joe Biden, the next president of the United States. And with that, it is my great honor to introduce Dr. Jill Biden. As we all know, she is a lifelong educator. She has spent her career fighting for access to education for all people. She has spent a career as the second lady of the United States and even beyond in fighting for our veterans and in particular the spouses of military personnel. She has been a voice that has been about the power that women leaders can have. And she's just an extraordinary human being. And I'm just so excited to look at the possibility of her being in the White House with Joe Biden.